This episode of The Young Turks is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook at audiblepodcast.com/TYT.
Gretchen Morgenson has another great article in the New York Times, great in terms of information, disastrous in terms of what that information is. Banks are coming. Here we go. I knew that once we passed financial reform, and it wasn't really reform, and that there was a million loopholes in it, it was only a matter of time until the banks found their new risky venture to take risks with. Why? Because if you take more risks, you make more profit. You make more bonuses in the short run. They have to do it. It is a law of nature. Should they not be greedy? It's an absurd statement. If they're so-called not greedy, they will be fired because somebody else has to come in and make more profit. How do you make more profit in banking? By taking greater risk and trying to transfer that risk onto other people, whether it is your counterparties, whether it's even your shareholders if you're an executive, or whether it's the taxpayers, which is their ideal. So now they have begun that process, okay? And they're doing it in three different ways. One is called covered bonds. Now, covered bonds are supposed to be a safe investment, and the banks are supposed to back up that. I know it's very complicated. I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. But the banks are basically playing the game that, hey, you know what? If something goes wrong with those so-called covered bonds, maybe we don't cover them, and we let the FDIC cover them, meaning the American taxpayer covers them. So we get the profits, but if anything goes wrong, well, then the American people pay the downside, okay? Where have we seen that movie before? That's part one. Part two of their attack is what they call qualified residential mortgages. Now, why is this important? They're going back into the mortgage scam. Now, what financial reform did was they said, if you're doing risky loans, now it was supposed to be all loans, but they carved out a loophole. They said if you're doing risky loans, you have to keep a certain percentage of those loans, so you have the incentive to make them not as risky as you would if you were just going to pass them off and make a buck and then let it explode on someone else, right? But the exception in the loophole was if it is a qualified residential mortgage, then you do not have to keep a piece of it. So the bank could say, hey, that's a qualified mortgage. That's a look-at mortgage. I don't keep any of it. I'm going to pass it on to someone else. I make the money in the meanwhile, and they take the risk, right? Now, that's a recipe for disaster. That's how we sunk the market in the first place. That was at least the trigger that caused the explosion, okay? Now, what are they doing? In the past, qualified residential mortgages were if you put down a certain percentage. For example, on your home, you put down 20%. Hey, you know what? That's a pretty solid mortgage you've got there. It's a qualified residential mortgage. Guess what? They're playing with those numbers. Oh, I didn't see that coming. And it turns out they are now putting some of the riskiest loans they have in the qualified residential mortgage batch so they can pass them on to other people and make a buck in the meanwhile. Shocking. More risk, more profit for banking executives, and then that risk is transferred onto the suckers, which is their counterparties and you and I, the taxpayers. But those two parts are very bad, but not nearly as bad as the third part. These are called foreign currency forwards. It's actually really simple. All that means is derivatives on currency trading. So you know currency gambling. You say, hey, you know, I think the dollar is going to go up or the dollar is going to go down or the yen is going to go up or down based on what happened in Japan, and they make bets on that. Then they make derivative bets on that, which are much, much larger. In fact, to give you a sense of the scope of this issue, they make $4 trillion worth of derivatives bets on currency trading every single day. $4 trillion, okay? So you get a sense of how enormous this market is and what happens if something goes wrong. Well, it turns out in the financial reform package, somebody in the government gets to decide whether those are derivatives that should be regulated or whether they are safe bets that should not be regulated. You want to know who that somebody is? It's Tim Geithner, and he's about to make that decision. Now, which way do you think he's going to go? If he comes out and says, hey, you know what, they need to be tightly regulated, I'll come out here, I'll be incredibly relieved. I'll say, hey, give credit where credit is due. Tim Geithner made the right call there. Now, but my prediction, I am telling you ahead of time, is that Tim Geithner ain't going to make that call. You think those banks which make the most amount of money from that specific kind of derivative now are going to let Tim Geithner stop that flow of profits? Oh, hell no, they're not. They're going to say, hey, Timmy boy, you do as you're told. You've been our boy this whole time, and you're going to continue to be our boy. My guess is, and I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking, I'm telling you ahead of time, Tim Geithner will say, oh, no, currency trading is perfectly safe. No, those derivatives don't need to be regulated. And then it's a ticking time bomb. And it's just a matter of time before they crash not just the U.S. economy, but the entire global economy. What happens when you can't pay $1 trillion currency bet? And is it going to affect just our currency? No, it might not even involve our currency. It's going to have a domino effect on all of the currencies. And then we all go down together, and that'll be lovely. I told you, it was just a matter of time until they found a new racket. My sense was that it wasn't going to be the mortgage racket, that was played out. I guess I was partially wrong because they're going back to that racket in part 2 that I explained to you. But in terms of the next racket, they found it. It's currency trading, which they've been doing for a long, long time. They're just now doing riskier and much larger derivatives trading on currencies. It's a disaster in the waiting. It's only a matter of time. Let's see. Maybe Geithner becomes a hero. And maybe pigs fly. And maybe I'm pretty. I doubt all three of those things.
Audible.com is the leading provider of audiobooks. They've got 75,000 different titles. A book I've always meant to read but didn't have time for is Guns, Germs, and Steel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to it through Audible.com. Actually, if you're a Young Turks listener, you get a free audiobook at audiblepodcast.com/TYT.